Thank you very much, Dr. Kalaba. You forgot something in my CV, that I was once a student with you.
There's a reason I left it out.
Yes. Thank you very much. And we once served in a faculty council somewhere the north of this city of Pretoria. Thank you very much, Dr. Kalaba. Let me also welcome my fellow panelist, Methabi Nkosi, during this Women's Month. And let me also greet all the women who are in here and say, this is your month. We hope that you'll enjoy it. Let me also greet my fellow panelist, Ntate Johan Kotze from SAPO, who over the years we have had and shared quite a lot of insights with. I would also like to greet today the board of the chair, Mayor Annemarie van der Merwe, Prof. Fedi Meyer, and the team, the fabulous team from BFAP. I would like to greet all the captains of our industry. I think over the years I've come to realize that this is where we all congregate and have the outlook and pep each other. Thank you very much. I would also like to welcome fellow government employees who are here in all your various capacities, viewers and listeners. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. After receiving the invitation to this August occasion, an engagement on agricultural economics community of practice, and the theme, balancing short-term tactical responses with long-term development goals, I had no hesitation in accepting the invite for various reasons. Firstly, agriculture plays a role in South Africa's economic reconstruction and recovery plan, and therefore the path that we have got to follow during and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. Secondly, government recognizes and appreciates that the latent potential of agriculture and agro-processing sectors towards the amelioration of the triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Hence, the signing of the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan by various value chain actors within this ecosystem has heralded an era where we all have got to hold hands and move forward in tandem. Consistent with the theme of this August occasion, the AMP plays the short-term responses and development goals get to propel the agriculture and agro-processing sectors and industries to a higher, inclusive economic trajectory. Lastly, agriculture and agro-processing industries are significant contributors to the economy through foreign exchange earnings via exports, also employment levels. Therefore, this engagement, ladies and gentlemen, presents to foster and also strengthen public in the field of processing and commerce in general. It would be remiss of me not to mention the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is opening new opportunities for deeper regional integration. Currently, the intra-African exports makes almost 18% of the total trade, compared to the 59% and 70% of intra-Asia and intra-Europe trade, respectively. In 2020, intra-African trade was down to 16%, mainly attributed to COVID-19 related supply chain disruptions that we all know of. Poor infrastructure, non-tariff measures, and limited food output is largely the cause for limited intra-African trade. Noticing the potential benefits of this free trade area, South Africa deposited its instruments of ratification on the 10th of February 2019. Parallel to that, South Africa has embarked on the infrastructure development drive to promote regional integration, as articulated in the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan. On a medium to long term, we have got infrastructure requirements that are meant to deepen regional integration. Infrastructure backlogs, both on farm and off farm, are a challenge not only to South Africa but also to the entire African continent. The World Bank estimates that Africa's infrastructure gap requires all around $360 billion to build energy, water, ICT, and transport infrastructure. And these networks are very important in terms of this sector of ours. If we just glance at Pillar 6 within the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan, we dissect the comparative disadvantage of the agriculture and agro-processing sector resulting from infrastructure challenges. In mitigating this, the President of South Africa has established an investment and infrastructure office in the presidency to coordinate and align investments and work on various structures responsible for economic and social infrastructure development, leveraging on public and private funds. To date, we have 203 infrastructure projects that have been evaluated with 1.8 trillion rands. About 13 of these are in the agriculture sector, and one of those are the flagship programs that we have in the department, the Farmer Producer Support Units, which will enable our farmers to access technology, import markets, storage facilities, and irrigation schemes. In the execution of these FPSUs, we have also enlisted the services of the African Development Bank. We are of a firm view that successful completion of the bulk infrastructure projects will enable global competitive performance of the agriculture and agro-processing sectors. The total gross value of agricultural output in South Africa during 2010-2011 was a meager 144 billion. And this figure has almost doubled by 2017-18 to 277 billion. In 2021, the total gross value of agricultural output was recorded at 342 billion. It is important to indicate that this growth and input was not necessarily accompanied by an increase in hectares under production, but rather the result of improvements in terms of yields or productivity. In South Africa, and the rest of the world for that matter, research and development, or rather research for development, as we would like to call it, in the form of biotechnology, is becoming increasingly critical for the development of high-yielding varieties that are globally competitive, albeit at the backdrop of climate change. To this end, the government of the Republic of South Africa, guided by Pillar 3 of the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan, is intentional about our R&D by using statutory levies to improve on the global competitiveness of our sector. Social compact nature of the AMP forces integration and cooperation by value chain actors on R&D endeavors. One of the critical issues that we have got to look at is farm mechanization, irrigation solutions in the short to medium term. Research reports indicate that the total gross capital formation in agriculture in South Africa increased from 9.2 billion in 2010 to 16.4 billion in 2020, representing a growth of 77% in 10 years. This includes fixed improvements, as well as tractors, machinery, and other implements. In terms of the hectares, the total agricultural land that was under irrigation in 2020 was about 1.3 million hectares. As a water-scarce country, growth in irrigation areas in South Africa is generally limited by the availability of irrigation water. And I know that quite a lot of industries that are gearing towards growth have got difficulties in terms of this area. This means that the country must consistently seek innovative solutions via research for development to produce more agricultural output with the limited and scarce available water to meet the growing food demands of our growing population. Our expectation, amongst others, is that the session reflects on the experiences that we'll have shared with the community of practice in attendance today in relation to adaptability, affordability, and appropriate solutions that may be suitable for African farming. South Africa is an export-orientated sector generating almost 55% of its annual value added on foreign earnings. Its linkages with international markets makes it very vulnerable to global and external shocks such as conflict between Russia and Ukraine, as we have experienced, COVID-19, as we have experienced, and later on, the bans that we will talk about in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. Due to these external shocks, food prices in South Africa have been increasing, causing concerns to our customers, whom are already battling with the harsh economic and job realities. The prices of grain commodities such as sunflower, wheat, maize have increased by a range of between 30 and 50% in the first quarter of 2022, as compared to the corresponding period in 2021. Fertilizer prices have skyrocketed by close to 150% compared to last year in quarter one. The cost of a typical food basket in South Africa was measured at 1,070 in April of 2022, and this should be concerning, pushing the customer food inflation beyond the targeted 6% on the upper boundary. Not only South Africa is experiencing elevated food prices, but almost all countries across the globe. In mitigation to these external shocks, countries in Asia, Europe, and Americas have instituted a series of trade measures. Some of these measures are impeding on trade. It is generally agreed and accepted that market access by an exporting agribusiness is determined and subject to a number of factors, such as transaction cost, the tariff regime, and an assortment of government regulations, as you would know. Recently, the non-tariff measures are more diverse and to some extent less transparent. These represent a significant barrier to entry into global markets. Amongst the most important of the non-tariff measures in the trade of agro-food products are sanitary and phytosanitary measures, as we call them SPS measures. Notwithstanding the importance of such measures of protection of plant, animal, and human health in the importing country, we will have to face difficulties and deal with them as they arise. Often, when these SPS measures are conceptualized, programmed, and implemented, they are implemented in a way that makes it unnecessary or even tedious for exports of certain exporting countries and agribusinesses to compete. Hence, they can constitute trade barriers as effective as monetary tariffs. While tariffs and quantitative restrictions to trade have declined, there has been a growing recognition that the new measure that we have got to deal with are SPS measures that can impede trade of agro-food products. Attempts have been made to reduce these trade distortive measures through the WTO, and the recent 12th Ministerial Conference tried to deal with these issues, but no solution was found. We have got to agree that some of these solutions are inefficient and fail to address many of the key problems that we experience. Which brings me to a point that I know that most of you would like to reflect on: the issue around biosecurity in our country. Biosecurity is a shared responsibility. It is everyone's responsibility, and therefore everyone needs to tend to their responsibility so as we can protect the economy, the environment, and the community from these threats. We are currently experiencing an outbreak of foot and mouth disease, and we have promulgated a standstill on the movement of cattle for 21 days. I understand this is a very drastic measure and maybe the last in the artillery of measures that government has in order to stop the spread. But as I read in the Farmers Weekly this week, what would be the alternative? We need to preserve our industries and ensure that the plans that we have entrenched for the growth of our sector, as will be articulated later on today, remain on a critical path of success. In implementing measures, it will be very difficult, and I know that it is difficult, and it's going to. But we have, of course, if we envisage the growth and transformation in our red meat industry, or in the wool industry that is currently facing the very same challenge that I had to address this morning in my engagement with China. The international front, we have been confronted with the issues around China. We have been confronted with the issues around the EU on citrus. The new measures that were put in place to mitigate against the false cod mouth by the EU are technically unjustified. And we continue to engage on this at a technical level and through the WTO dispute resolution mechanisms that are being provided. These measures run the risk of undoing the sterling work that was done by the citrus industry and our industry over the past decades. These are but and biosecurity concerns that we are having. We can only overcome this by having meaningful partnerships within this sector. Biosecurity can hardly afford any stand and cake approach by any partner, and we have got to share the responsibilities. In conclusion, it is projected that through the World Bank that agriculture and agribusiness in South Africa will grow to 1 trillion industry by 2030. US dollars, 1 trillion US dollars. This shows the enormous opportunity for economic growth for our sector. In the long term, the critical pillar of market access to access the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, to access the Africa Growth Opportunity Act, AGOA, the Economic Partnership Agreement, the IPA, the Forum for China and Africa, FOCAC, will provide the basis for exploitation of the trade opportunities that we have as a country. In the short term, market access will dictate the achievement of the long-term strategic objectives that we have. Hence, recently, with the signature put on the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan, we have set out the short to medium to long-term plan on how to develop a globally competitive agriculture and agro-processing sectors that are driven and are market-orientated and inclusive in production to develop our rural economies, ensuring food security and growing decent and inclusive employment in our sector. Allow me, Program Director, that I have got to wish you a frank and robust engagement. I have got no doubt that BFAP outlined that we'll have today will continue to influence the policy and investment decisions in our country. To the BFAP team, led by the chairperson of the board, well done. To the sector, I implore that we utilize the baseline that we will receive today towards our continuous reimagining of a sustainable agricultural and agro-processing sector. I thank you.